Great. All right. So first, I guess a little bit about me and what my organization is. I'm currently affiliated with Outdoor Asian. I am a, let's see, welcome to, okay, great. Yeah, and currently, I am a project coordinator for Outdoor Asian. And our vision, and so like our motto, our vision is to create a diverse and inclusive community of Asian and Pacific Islanders in the outdoors. So, we want to create a community that connects to the outdoors, and it doesn't really matter what your outdoor activity is. Hiking, mountaineering, rock climbing, or even foraging, anything that involves you getting out in the outdoors, if that's the community you want to be involved in, and you are of Asian and Pacific Islander descent, yeah, just please come along and yeah, enjoy what we can offer. And so, usually we have events every month or so, and the main chapter is in Washington State. But while it's really difficult during COVID, we've been really navigating around it, and we've tried multiple ways to keep having events happening throughout the year, whether they be virtual events like this, or just having a socially distanced hikes. And that's more or less what Outdoor Asian is. But a little bit more about me and being a presenter. I'm a Korean American first generation, and I'm based in Federal Way, Washington. And ever since I could remember, I've always had a love for animals and fish. And my very first drawings were about the fish in oceans. And it might be genetic, but my grandfather, back when he lived in Korea around the 1960s and 70s, right after the Korean War, he opened up an aquatic and plant shop. And so even though he died before I was born, I guess the genetics just really kept passing, and it was really strong enough that I now have all of these different aquariums, and I'm just passionate about sharing that passion that I have towards you guys. And so, this is a refuge festival, right? But so why do we have aquariums? And so simply, I believe it's because aquariums, they're extremely therapeutic. And when you feel like there's nothing in control of your life, and everything's going a bit crazy, like personally, I would go towards things such as houseplants or aquariums. And at least inside these small little boxes, I could control everything that's going on inside it, right? And so I had a little bit of control in this world. And since COVID and since a lot of people are at home right now, I believe that it's even more important that we really try to connect with nature. And because so many people are inside home right now, people are kind of thinking like, oh, how do I want to spruce up the place? Or how do I want to include nature into this area? And simply, houseplants and aquariums are the best way. You're literally taking a piece of nature and you're bringing it into your house, and you're just cohabitating with it. And just how much, what more could you ask for, right? But this is an introduction to aquariums. So I think what's really important is why do you personally want to get into aquariums? So for example, what a lot of people start aquatics with is they go to the Piola Fair or any festival, and they see a prize pool, right? And then what's inside the prize pool? You see 50 to 100 small orange goldfish. And let's say you've taken a few, and now you have 2, 3 in a bag, and you're bringing them home. Now what? Well, the thing is with those feeder goldfish, what a lot of people don't know is that they actually get 2 feet tall, like 2 feet long. They're related to koi and carp. And so, I believe what's really important in this hobby is just having that background research and really making sure you're knowing what you're getting yourself into. Because, aquariums, they're all living ecosystems, and they all do require a little bit of effort. Personally, I only take around maybe 20 minutes a month really doing these water changes, just because these ecosystems are so, I guess, well cycled, is that they actually don't require as much care as you think. People, when they think about taking care of an aquarium, they imagine like lugging buckets and buckets of water, putting it in and out, and you have all this cloudy water, it smells, and the goldfish aren't happy, the fish are dying, the kids are crying. So what do? Well, what's really important is that luckily we have the internet now, and we have all of these different resources that we can use to just learn more about the aquatic experience. And so really, is it for your child? Is it for you? What do you want to do with these? You are in control of these aquariums. Is it simply for decoration? Do you want to keep it as a pet? We have these aquatic pets such as my turtle right over here, Jaya, or you can have these big fish that are like this big, like flower horns or Oscars, and they each have individual personalities. So it's an amazing hobby, extremely therapeutic, and stick with me, and I hope that you enjoy the experience. And so the number one thing is, how much space do you have? So this right here, right behind me, this is a 55-gallon aquarium. You know, this is back in the day in early 2000 or so, when aquatics were getting really popular, maybe even up to the 1990s. These were the really big popular aquariums. People would keep one giant fish in there or just a bunch of goldfish in there. But nowadays, as people have been, going in more into apartments or going into condos, people have been going into smaller aquariums. For example, this is a 29-gallon, or I'll just show you right now. What I have here is a 5-gallon. Now, a 5-gallon is definitely what I recommend for beginners. It's a very small footprint. The support that an aquarium requires is actually quite a lot. For example, 1 gallon of water is 8 pounds. So this 5-gallon right here, 5 times 8, that's 40 pounds of just water right in this. So you can imagine a 55-gallon, that'll be around at least 400, 500 pounds, especially if you include all the different sand and everything. So what's really important is knowing where do you want to put this aquarium and how big you want it, because depending on how big the aquarium is, that will determine what kind of fish you can have. And for example, those really small goldfish that you find at the fair, they're going to get really big. You could try housing them in a 55-gallon, but honestly, for those guys, if you want them to reach their full capacity, they're going to require a pond, which is going to require maybe 2,000 gallons. So that's something you have to do outside, and you really can't do that at home. But today we'll just go ahead and talk about this 5-gallon here. And one question that I get a lot is, how much does it all cost? Now, you see, the aquarium and the fish, those are actually the cheap parts. The expensive part is creating that ecosystem. So, with a lot of these aquarium fish, they're going to be found in the tropical areas, for example, Peru, Brazil, Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia. That betta fish that you see in a cup at the Petco or PetSmart or Walmart, or used to be a Walmart, those fish actually require around 78 to 80 degrees. So that part right there, the heater, and we'll go ahead and discuss each individual item in depth later. But you're going to need your heater, you're going to need your filter, you're going to need like a chemical. For example, Chem Prime is a dechlorinator, and all the stuff we'll go into depth later. But for a small 5 to 10 gallon, you're going to be expecting to spend a total of a fish, a substrate, tank, everything. It's going to be probably around $100. So make sure to keep that in your budget. And again, the number one thing about this hobby, always do your research and just kind of make a price sheet. And questions and stuff, we'll go ahead and give around 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to really dive deep into those questions. And so this aquarium, so where do you find an aquarium? So the Petco, PetSmart, those big box stores, those are usually the places where you're going to find them. A long time ago, you had these local mom and pop fish stores, and those are really popular, but they have been decreasing in popularity lately, so you're not going to see them as much frequently. You can also find aquariums at Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, all of these different secondhand shops. And usually I don't recommend aquariums, especially you're bringing a box that can hold like 50, 80 gallons of water. You don't want that to just shatter right into your room, right? You have to make sure that you can trust the person that's providing the aquarium, and you have to make sure that they're doing a water test. And so usually with these aquariums, you're going to find them in glass, not acrylic, and those are the cheaper ones to make. And when you go to a lot of stores, etc., you see fish bowls. Fish bowls I actually do not recommend. They're going to be around 1 gallon in size, or even like half a gallon. The thing is, there's just not enough space for a cycle to occur. There's not enough space for a fish to move around. That betta fish, that really long, flowy, thin fish that you see in the cup at the Petco and PetSmart, they're actually, in the wild, they have these giant ponds that they consider as territory. So just being trapped inside that little pond, that little fishbowl, is not really going to be good for them in the long run. They might live for 1 to 2 years, but those guys can generally live 3 to 5 years. So why not give them the best treatment possible, right? So, one thing I mentioned about earlier was a cycle. Now, this is, I keep saying number one, but this is the number one cardinal rule of fish keeping. This is the reason why so many people fail at being able to keep fish long term. And it's called the nitrogen cycle. And that's actually the reason why I have the scientist lab coat on right now. It's because we're just going to dive a little bit into the science. Now, what is the nitrogen cycle? So when fish eat, they poop and pee, and they release ammonia into the water, correct? And so that ammonia is very toxic, and if it accumulates at high parts per million, high concentrations, then you'll have a lot of health problems, such as like gill burning and just a really quick death. Now, how do you fix that? You introduce bacteria into these aquariums. Now, they're called nitrifying bacteria. And so what they do is they play part of that nitrogen cycle. So you have ammonia, right? The bacteria eats the ammonia. It turns into a chemical or a compound called nitrite, right? So ammonia, nitrite. And then another type of bacteria eats the nitrite and it becomes nitrate. Now, nitrate, while it's not perfectly clean, it's easily digestible by plants. So if you see in my ecosystems back here, I have a lot of plants and they absorb a lot of that nitrogen. And so that's why I only do water changes once a month, because I have that a complete ecosystem. And so once again, it goes from ammonia, nitrite, nitrate. And so how do you facilitate this bacteria? So most of the bacteria, if not 95% of it, is going to be found in your filters. Now you have a bunch of like the sponge material inside the filter, right? That bacteria is going to colonize, it's going to grow inside that filter. And as water passes through it, the water is going to be carrying that ammonia, right? And so that bacteria, as the water passes through the sponge, that bacteria is going to eat that ammonia and convert it into nitrite. It's going to convert it into nitrate. And so that is the number one thing that you have to make sure of. You have to make sure that you maintain your filter. But how do you maintain your filter? How do you not kill this bacteria colony, this life-giving bacteria inside your aquarium? That's why we have things called dechloroinators. And now what I will bring here, so this is the most popular the most popular brand is called Chem Prime. And you usually see these things called dechlorinators in your water. So inside a lot of our tap water, all this water back here is all tap water, but it's treated tap water. And the way I treat it is with dechlorinator. Now, dechlorinator, it removes the chlorine and chloramine inside the water. And the chlorine, usually it's good for us in the tap water. When we drink tap water, we want to make sure that there isn't bacteria inside it, right? Or like when we're taking a shower. But in this case, we want to keep the bacteria inside these waters, which is why we have this dechlorinator. And so if you have the proper dechlorinator and you have a proper filter, fish keeping, you're going to solve 95% of your problems. Okay. And how do you get that bacteria? That bacteria, usually what I recommend for first timers is you go to a fish store and you ask simply for a little bit of that sponge material in their filters. Or you can buy a plant or some of the rock or decor in an already established aquarium. And so you carry that bacteria over, you bring it to your aquarium, and maybe around a week or so, you have your complete aquarium. And literally that's the biggest part about the aquarium hobby. You need to make sure that you keep that aquarium cycle running. And keep that aquarium cycle running, your fish are going to be fine. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do this demonstration. I'm going to set up this 5-gallon aquarium for you and just show you how easy it is. So the number one thing when you see this empty aquarium, what do you want to fill it with? You want to fill it up with substrate. Now, personally, I use sand. I have the sand right here. And the type of sand that you can use, you can go to a Home Depot or a Lowe's and simply get a playground sand, like that play sand that costs $3 to $5 for a 50-pound bag. yeah, you can go ahead, rinse that out, and put it inside your aquariums. Back here, I have a lot of sand called pool filter sand. It's a little bit more expensive. It's used for like taking care of plants and everything. But let's see here. Just oh, sorry, the chat. All right, I'm a little bit far away from the camera, but yeah, I'll just go ahead and dump the sand right here. Great. So go ahead, shake it, move it around. You generally want maybe around like an inch or so of substrate. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, super simple. Now, there are a lot of these different types of substrate you could use. You can use gravel, special aquarium sand, soil, but sand that's very basic, it's very pretty, and that's what I recommend. I highly recommend against using the pink or the neon-y gravel that you see at a lot of pet stores because they're coated in paint, and eventually over time they chip off, and that results in fish eating that toxic material and your fish having a premature death because of those. So I personally don't recommend those very colorful gravels. As much as your children might like it, your children definitely will be asking, Mom, Dad, could you buy me that clown colored gravel? But do your best to say no, because it's just a very yeah, I highly don't recommend it, the toxic material. And so water, and earlier yeah, so we want to fill this up, right? So what do we fill it up with? I just use, again, tap water, and of course, make sure to use a dechlorinator. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a thermometer in your aquarium, and depending on the fish that you have, it's going to be either that 72 to 78 high, maybe like low 80s, depending on the fish that you have. And so I'm just going to go ahead. I prepared a little bit of tap water, and in my own room, I'm just going to go ahead and start pouring it right in. Alright. In this water, I already treated with dechlorinated tap water, and let's see here. And so this is what you mean by the aquarium hobby, right? Lugging a bunch of buckets around. But there are these things that you can buy called pythons, which really ease the water transfer process. All right. There we go. All right. And that is our beautiful 5-gallon aquarium. Let me just stir it around a little bit, make sure it's nice and even. Yeah, usually I make sure to buffer the amount of flow by just putting my hand underneath and then putting water in. But right now there aren't any inhabitants, only sand. So I just went ahead and put it right in. And you want to make sure that you have a thermometer. This guy right here is definitely sufficient enough. They cost around $2 to $3 at any local store. Let's go ahead and put it right in. And I'll go ahead and measure your water. Great. And currently my water is room temperature. All right. Okay. Okay, so we talked about temperature, we talked about the water and how to treat it. What's next is the filter itself. Now there are a lot of different types of filters. Right back here, I have this thing called a sponge filter, and pretty much what it is, it's an air pump, and it goes into the aquarium. And the reason why you see a lot of bubbles is because as the air goes up, the water comes in because there's a vacuum of space and there's a sponge. And so that's why it's called a sponge filter. But for a lot of beginners, what I recommend is the hang-on back filter. Now this one is just a really cheap filter called from Regent. Now these cost around $5 to $10, but depending on what you want, like you can get up to maybe even $200. Now there's these big filters. They're called canister filters, and it's actually down there. But these canister filters are external, and if you want to spend a lot of money, like $100 to $150, it gets you a lot of filtration. But if you're a beginner, I just generally recommend a hang-on back. It's just so simple. What you do is you hang it on the back, you plug it right in. It produces that sound, right? That's the pump running, and so the motor running. So go ahead, put a little bit of water in there. That creates the flow, the suction, and just a little bit more. Right, and then you have water running out of it. As simple as that. And now look at you go. You have created a house for your bacteria. And yep, that's as simple as it is. Hang on back filters. Now, and so if you're just doing a 5-gallon, just your first aquarium, go ahead and use one of these guys. Now, we also have heaters now. heaters, they're going to be around $20 to $30, and there are a lot of preset ones, especially the cheaper ones. But personally, I recommend things like Eheim, Hydor, like the higher quality ones, just because it's going to range from $20 to $30 to even $40. But that's the lifeblood of your aquarium. You have to make sure that it's at the correct temperature so that their fish can thrive. So this is a simple 5-gallon, and depending on how cold the water is, or not how cold the water is, but how cold your room is. For example, currently my room is 73 degrees, and so my water temperature is going to be around 70 degrees. So depending on the fish I have, I don't even need to have a filter for some. For example, my turtle tank right here, I don't have a filter in this because Jaya, she's from the Mississippi, Louisiana area, I believe. And so this species is very used to cold temperatures. So always make sure to know what kind of fish you have. That way you can figure out what kind of temperature preset you need. So go ahead and dial it to the correct temperature. I have it at 75. Put it right in. Put it up. And there you go. As simple as that. And depending on your preferences, you can put it like on the side or next to the filter. I usually recommend like putting it kind of like this. That way, the filter is able to absorb all of that heated water and then really like pass it through the aquarium in a much more efficient way. And so yeah, that's the heater, that's the filter, and those are going to be your most expensive items for this hobby. And now let's talk about lights. When a lot of people think about fish keeping, they think about just the fish in the bowl, right? But in the late 90s, that's when people were able to imagine like, oh wow, we can actually put plants inside of our aquariums. Let's see. And so yeah, if you look back here, I have all of these planted aquariums, and they absorb all of that ammonia, that nitrite, and so that allows you to do less water changes, makes the hobby a lot easier and a lot more therapeutic. And so yeah, so I recommend a few plants. We can use things such as, if you look at the very back, it's called hornwort, anacarus, java fern, anubias. These are all very easy plants to keep and quite cheap, honestly. Each individual is going to cost maybe around $3 to $5. And so if you just have a good cluster of them, for $15 to $20, you can go ahead and have your tank planted. So, currently I don't have plants prepared, but what I can do is go ahead and take some of my plants back here. All right, could just go ahead, and I'm going to take, let's take this one, this is called the anacarus. All right. Beautiful plant here. All right, and I'm just going to go ahead and transfer it right over. There you go. Put it right in the middle, like so. Great. And now you can get a little creative with it. Maybe you want to add some rocks. Rocks are, part of the natural ecosystem, so why not, like, there you go. Go ahead, put that right in there. Some people, they put a lot of wood. Like I have a wood island or some wood back there, and wood, they provide things called tannins. And what tannins are, there's that tea color that you get inside your drinks, and that really helps de-stress the fish. It's antibacterial, so that's something I highly recommend. Just adding a little bit of wood inside your aquariums, right? And so now that we have plants, we have to kind of think about the lighting, right? And okay, yep.
Daniel, we're just getting a few questions in the chat box, but I let people know you'll have time at the end.
Great, sounds good. And this hobby, there are a lot of questions, and definitely asking questions is the best way to get better. And so this right here is an LED light. Now, in the past, people used T5s, T8s, fluorescents, halogen lights, and everything. But nowadays, LED technology got really good, and so they're quite cheap. They emit very little heat, and they don't cost much to run. This probably is only going to take 3 to 5 watts. And so back in the day, you had to do all these different types of calculations, and you have to make sure you get the right light and the fluorescence. But now you have an LED that you can buy that came from China that costs maybe around $20 or so. Go ahead, plug it right in. And I usually recommend keeping it in a cycle for around 8 hours a day or so. And then there you go, you have this beautiful aquarium. So simple to make. And with this light, you're going to go ahead and have that plant produce through photosynthesis. It's going to go through all of those cycles and definitely produce a much more better environment, ecosystem. All right, and so we have the filter, we have the heater, we have the rocks, the substrate, the plants, the light. What's missing? Simply, they're going to be fish. Now, you can, and again, I remember what we talked about in the past. This is a 5-gallon tank, right? So a 5-gallon tank is going to be good for maybe a betta fish, maybe some of those really small rasbora fish, these small community fish, or even just a few snails. Guppies are very popular, and I have a few guppies here, and I'll go ahead and put that inside the tank. And you can also put things like a neonfish. I don't recommend that you use those algae eaters. They're called plecostomus. And those are the ones that suck on the glass that you see at a lot of pet stores. People don't realize, because you see them only being maybe like 2 inches at the store. They get like a foot long. So you have to make sure that you know what fish you're buying, how big it's going to get, and if your ecosystem is the right ecosystem for them. So I'm going to go ahead and get a few fish from here. All right. And so what's another handy thing to do is have a fish net. And let's see here. Go ahead and get a bag. I'm gonna turn this off. So many things going on here, right? All right. Move this. So if you go to any pet store, usually they'll go ahead and fill it up with a little bit of water in a bag. With this much water, maybe a little bit more. All right. And they go ahead and dump the fish in. All right. Classic fish bag that you see at the store, right? Now, remember how I was talking about that cycle? That's one thing I just forgot to mention. How do we get that cycle started again? Remember I was talking about just get a little bit of plant material or some of that sponge from an already established aquarium. So just go ahead, and usually what I do when I start a new aquarium, I go ahead and ask a friend, like, hey, could you lend me some of your filtration? Go ahead, just throw it right into your filter, and congratulations, you have the cycle. Now it's your job to maintain it. So with this right here, you have the fish in a bag. They're very highly stressed. Now what do? You have the aquarium set up. Make sure that the cycle runs for maybe like 3-4 days or so. If you have the sponge material, make sure everything's established and consistent. Go ahead and just let the fish float. Let the fish float for around 5 minutes or so. And the reason why you want to do that is because you want to make sure that the temperature inside the bag matches the temperature inside the aquarium. Now, currently, just for presentation's sake, I already made sure to have them at the same temperature, so I can go ahead and put the fish inside the aquarium. All right. And just like so. Usually, I recommend that you don't just put the tank water from the previous place into your aquarium, because you want to make sure that you don't introduce disease into your establishment. But in this case, they're all my aquarium, so it's okay. But so there we go. Honestly, that's pretty much it. And that's all it takes to set up an aquarium. Again, just to talk about the main points, you want to make sure that you maintain the filtration, maintain that cycle, use that dechlorinator. And in terms of feeding your fish, that's actually another important thing. Make sure that you don't feed your fish too much. That sounds a little bit cruel, but fish, when they're in the wild, they're constantly looking for food, right? They don't know when the next meal is going to be happening. And so, once they associate you as the provider of food, when you get close to the aquarium, they're going to scramble right against the glass begging for food. Make sure that you set a schedule and make sure that you don't feed them too much, because the more you feed, the more ammonia that they produce, And then the more the cycle has to work harder to, balance that ecosystem. So make sure that you feed them just a good amount, and usually that's just a small pinch. Small pinch. Have each fish maybe have 2 to 3 bites, and then have them eat again the next day. And that's generally what I recommend. And besides that, that's how you take care of an aquarium. Introducing Oasis to your indoors 101. Great. And I'll go ahead and take questions.
So I'll read some questions from the chat box, so people feel free to put some in there. We have some compliments first. So Michaela said, can I just say that Daniel's lab coat and steampunk goggles perfectly complement his awesome knowledge and delivery? And Francis and Natalie agreed.
Thank you.
Natalie asked, do aquariums need to stay away from sunlight?
Generally I'll say yes. And the reason why is because sunlight introduces a lot of energy into the system, right? And so when you have too much sunlight and not enough nutrients or not enough plants that you are able to use those nutrients, you're going to get a lot of algae. And so that green muck that you see on the side of your wall, that a lot of people ask, like they get the algae eaters for. Now, if you look behind my aquarium, I don't have any algae, and that's because I have those planted aquariums. So generally for beginners, I recommend that you don't have the aquarium right next to a window, because you'll get fluctuations in the amount of light you get, and you might get fluctuations in the amount of heat you might get.
Thanks. Natalie also asked, does the sand not clog the filter?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So the sand, it generally does not clog the filter. And it also depends on what grain size you have. So pool filter sand and play sand, especially if you wash it, I usually rinse the whole thing, kind of like you're like preparing rice for a meal, right? Go ahead, spin that around and dump that water out. Do that maybe 5 to 10 times. You're going to get pretty clear water, and only the really big, hard, like the dense sand is going to be remaining inside that bucket. And then that is what you use to put inside the aquarium. And when that happens, you generally don't have sand clogging up your filter, unless that input is like really close to the sand. And generally, you want it to be at least like 2 inches off from the bottom.
Keiko asked, is it harder to have an aquarium full of plants but without fish?
It is easier, I'll say, to take care of. So, one thing that I really recommend is that okay, sorry about that, I got a call. But look up a term called aquascaping, and that's pretty much introducing that garden into your home. And if you happen to live in the Washington area, there are a few stores that I do recommend. There's an amazing aquascaping place called Aquarium. Aquaria is located in Bellevue, Washington. And another beautiful place is called Aquarium Zen. Now, these two places really focus in on maintaining that beauty of nature inside your home establishment. And if that's the place that's close to you, that's where I recommend you go.
Cool. We have 2 more so far. Is it okay to rescue fish from people trying to get rid of them, or when they're not being taken care of, or is that too hard for the fish?
No, definitely. If you're able to provide them a good home, by all means, go for it. In terms of like rescuing a fish, that means you might have like 2 goldfish with 2 of those giant algae eaters all inside a 5-gallon aquarium. If you're able to provide them that home of a big 55-gallon aquarium with the right temperature requirement, with the right diet and everything, why not go ahead and save that fish? One thing I don't recommend people do is if they go to a pet store and they see like a lot of sick fish, I recommend you don't buy over there, because what that will kind of signal is that people want more of that fish, and so more people might bring that in, therefore resulting in that business bringing more of those fish into the store and not taking as much good care of them.
Do you have to keep the lights on at night?
No, I usually have mine set on timers. And so I follow the 8-hour rule. So you want to have the LED light emitting around 8 hours a day. And so usually for me, that's going to be around, usually I turn my timer on maybe for like an hour or two in the morning so that I can go ahead and enjoy my aquariums right when I wake up. And then they turn off for the rest of the day. And then until maybe, I'll say 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock, they turn on again, and then they'll go ahead and get the whole 8 hours. And so you'll be able to enjoy your tanks a lot more that way. And then you don't have to fight the algae as much.
Are most tropical fish sold in stores harvested from the wild?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting topic in the aquarium hobby. So a lot of your fish actually are farmed. They are produced in these big fish facilities, which for example, Florida is they're really big fish parks. There might be a few in Georgia. There are a few in Texas. So really those tropical areas where people can have these giant pools of just water that's constantly flowing in, and farmers are feeding them as much as they can, and the eggs are being produced inside the ponds, and they collect them and they raise them there, and then they ship them all out to wholesalers, which ship them out to different fish stores. And so most of our tropical fish are actually tank raised now, which is great. But also in terms of that, there is a thing to talk about in terms of like wild caught fish. So the term wild caught, people usually imagine wild caught being quite bad for the ecosystem. People go in there and they take all the fish, right? But what usually happens in these Peru and Brazil areas where you have a lot of these indigenous people or just people that are living in poverty, they need to be able to survive and feed and provide for their family. And so instead of burning down the forest or like damming the rivers or like killing and eating all of the fish, one thing that the aquarium hobby actually does is that they go ahead in these dry seasons when most of the water is really low and most of the fish will die. They go ahead and collect those and harvest those, and then they put them into wholesalers in Peru, Brazil facilities, and they ship them out to the rest of the world. And so, it depends on what kind of wild fish. So for example, saltwater, if you watch Finding Nemo, you had that diver go in and capture Nemo, right? That is something that we don't recommend. Saltwater, there's a lot of that, and we have a lot of the ecosystems which are devastated because of that. You want to make sure that like what the fish catching method is. For example, some fish, they inject a bunch of cyanide into the water, and the fish are gassed up and go up to the surface to gasp for air and catch them that way. So that's something that I don't recommend supporting. But most tropical fish, are going to be tank raised. Hope that answered the question.
That was the last question in the chat box. I don't know if people have any others they want to put in there.
Great.
Oh, here's another one. Do you have to trim the plants?
No, it depends. So it depends on what kind of plants that you have. For example, these plants back here, the background plants, I do have to trim them maybe once every month or so, because they might get too big and they'll outcompete with the other plants. But a lot of my bottom plants, they're slow growing, and so I don't trim them because I want them to grow. But in order to double in size, it might take 2 to 4 years, and so at that point you might go ahead and like establish a different aquarium at that point.
Cool. Other questions? What is the species of your turtle?
Yeah, my turtle species, it's a razorback musk turtle. They're native to Washington. They're native to the U.S. And let's see if I'm able to pry her out of the tank right now. She's usually shy, and during this time of the day, she doesn't like coming out. But let's see if we could kind of get her to come out a little bit today. All right, there we go. Okay. All right. So, I'm not sure if you can see it on camera, but this is my turtle, Jaya. All right. There we go. She's a cute little turtle, isn't she? Yeah. Got her from a breeder. Whoop. Oh, trying to run away now. But yeah, I got her from a breeder at a reptile expo a few months ago. It's been January, February since I had her, and she's around 1 year old now. And she's only going to get maybe around this big or so, 3 to 5 inches. So she's a small turtle, and she'll always be inside her aquatic. There you go. Thank you, Jaya. Hey, is there anything else I could help answer questions for you guys? This hobby is all about asking questions, learning more. Every day I'm learning something new every day. I study aquarium stuff maybe like once, like an hour a day. So yeah, always ask.
Everyone wants you to start a YouTube channel. And Natalie asked if your turtle eats the fish.
So the first question, I actually do have a YouTube channel, or I used to have a YouTube channel. It was called Eco-esque, and it was more of a hiking channel. That's what I really focus in more on. I'm more of a mountaineer, a hiker, an outdoorsman. But of course, I can never get away from nature because I always have this inside my home. But yeah, so it was a channel called Eco-esque, and it's where I try to inspire people to go out into the outdoors. And just because life got really busy, jobs and careers and everything, that's why I had to put the YouTube project on hold. But it was a lot of fun, and because of that, I got onto the local news, or I got people interviewing me. So it was a lot of fun while I had it, but it's just on pause for right now. And in terms of the second question, sorry, could you remind me of it?
Does your turtle eat the fish?
So Jaya, she's supposed to eat the fish. These fish are guppies, and so these turtles naturally eat fish in the wild. They primarily eat snails. Snails are the biggest prey items, and so I actually breed snails in the back, and I produce all these snails that I provide live food for because they're a more complete diet to the turtle, and so. The fish, they're quite fast, and so they usually don't get caught. I've never seen Jaya actually eat one of the fish, but it's definitely a possibility.
What is the name of the recommended light?
Yeah, so I recommend 2 lights. The first one is called Beams Work. So like a beam, BEAMS, like beams, work. WORK, Beams Work. And I also recommend Night Crew, NI Crew, CREW. So NICREW, Night Crew. These two are very cheap LEDs. They're found all over Amazon, or I don't think they're found in like Petco, etc. But they're very cheap, very efficient, and honestly, I'm growing all of my plants with Night Crew and Beams Work, the cheapest lights available. So if I can do it, you can do it too.
Thanks. Any other questions? I do have one announcement for later. I'm putting in the chat box for people. I think that's what we got. Super presentation, says Natalie. I agree.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Great. Thanks for coming, everyone. And if you have any question about the aquarium hobby, the internet's always there, and you can always send questions to me. My contact information might be provided at the end of the presentation. But yeah, definitely enjoy the aquarium hobby. It's my favorite thing in the world. When I had my hardest times, the aquarium hobby helped me so much. So I hope it does the same for you guys.